Zoom ZBA meeting. First thing I would like to do is to welcome our two new members, John Gatto and Amy Donnelly. Thank you for joining us. So I see John Gatto is here. I saw Amy sign on. Stephen, I saw was there. I'm here, and I saw Catherine here, and I saw Stacy is here. Is Joe Moriello signed on? Yes, he is. Okay, thank you. Okay, entertain a motion to open the December 9th meeting.
I make a motion.
Second, please. Second, please.
Second.
Thank you, John. All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Okay, away we go. First thing that we need to do, I'd ask if everyone has had a chance to look at the October 13th and the November 10th meetings minutes. Our two new members, I don't believe they can vote on the 13th, so it'll be Catherine, Stephen, and myself, and I viewed them, and I see no changes. Anyone else?
Nope, everything looks good.
Okay, October 13th. Entertain a motion for the October 13th meetings.
I make a motion.
All right, I'll second that. All those in favor by aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries to the October 13th meeting. Next one is the November 10th meeting. I'm not sure, John, when did you join?
Yeah, I think it was after that. I was not at that meeting.
Okay. So again, it'll be Stephen, Catherine, and myself. Does anyone have any changes to the minutes that they see that they need to make?
Nope, all good.
Okay. I'll entertain a motion to approve those minutes as presented.
I make a motion.
All right, I'll second that. All those in favor by aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, minutes have been approved. I'd also like to make notice that I realize that all of us realize this, but our meetings will now be held the second Wednesday. So that's just some general information. Next thing on the agenda, I would like to open up. Are there any comments from the public?
Yeah, someone's raising their hand.
Okay.
Daniel S., you can speak. You're muted though.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm reading a letter today on behalf of a group of New Paltz residents, including Bob Hughes, who's a former Town of New Paltz ZBA Vice Chair and Acting Chair, Linda Wells, former Village of New Paltz Planning Board member, Barbara Peterson, Roger Roloff, and myself. My name is Daniel Shevin. We're all residents of the Town of New Paltz. We're all residents of New Paltz. Linda lives in the village. Dear members of the Zoning Board of Appeals, although in this letter we express our disagreement with a specific code interpretation provided by the building inspector, we want to begin by emphasizing our respect for her expertise in general. We realize that the difference between a buffer and a buffer strip likely sounds negligible and unimportant. In the context of the decision before the ZBA concerning the location of the Empire State Trail, however, it is of critical significance. The building inspector based her interpretation on this very distinction between buffer and buffer strip, stating that while a paved surface like the Empire State Trail is permitted in a buffer, which the code never defines explicitly, it would be prohibited in a buffer strip, which the code does define in section 140-4 word usage and definitions. For this reason, we were left puzzled when, after stressing the difference between buffer and buffer strip, the building inspector then invoked the definition of buffer strip in explaining the purpose of the throughway buffer in her interpretation. In the printed version of the letter that was sent to you, we quote this specific section. I won't read it now just for brevity's sake. This appears to be a mistaken reference. Throughout the Gateway District's portion of the code, the term buffer is clearly used in reference to the throughway's impact, as in section 140-22(1)H, section 140-22 3DD, as well as in section 140.22.2 B2F, which is the line in question in this case. For this reason, the buffers the code demands at the Trans-Hudson site are not intended to, quote, protect uses on an adjoining lot from impacts of uses on the lot containing the buffer, as is otherwise the intention for buffers and buffer strips not adjacent to the throughway throughout the town. If the building inspector's citation of the definition of buffer strip in this specific instance is recognized as misplaced in describing the purpose of this throughway buffer, the question then becomes, would putting a 14-foot trail through the required 30-foot buffer undermine the intended purpose of the buffer? Throughout the code, different terms, including buffer strip, buffer, and buffering, are used in various passages, but always with a common objective: to reduce noise and visual impact. Here, a cursory review of best practices literature from planning professionals and scholars readily demonstrates that in order to mitigate noise and visual impact from a road like the thruway, a vegetated buffer must be thick, and the zoning requiring a minimum of 30 feet, and unpaved, given the enhanced sound mitigation provided by soft, irregular ground surfaces. It is worth noting as well here that the term trail in this case is something of a misnomer. The Empire State Trail is not a nature trail or a path like one would find in the Millbrook Preserve, but it's really a paved road that happens to be set aside for non-vehicular uses. It's clear that the drafters of the Gateway District's portion of the code did not intend for the substantial vegetated throughway buffers to contain significant paved areas. To this point, on October 15th, 2020, Susan Blickstein, who was the chairperson of the town committee, the so-called Route 299 Gateway Committee, whose research recommendations directly informed the zoning amendments at play here, submitted a letter to the town board stating, quote, "Please note that this buffer was intended to be free of improvements and disturbance," end quote. Although allowing the Empire State Trail to be sited in this buffer would obviously materially impair the envisioned function of the required buffer, and therefore conflicts with the intention of the code. Fortunately, the applicant has ample room on their site to move the trail westward and avoid the buffer. Doing so will not prevent them from being able to propose a viable project for the rest of the site. Thank you. That's all.
Okay, are there any other comments from the public? Okay.
Kathy has her hand raised.
Okay,
Hi, this is Kathy Zalantis, and I represent BFB New Paltz LLC and Trans Hudson Management Corp. I don't know if this is the appropriate time to make.
Kathy, could we save this for the time when we
Yes.
come to that particular item on the agenda?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anyone else with any other person in the audience with public comments?
This is Mariana Kushner. I'm not sure, again, I'm new to this forum. I have a variance application with the zoning board. I'm really not sure at what point.
Yes, you are on the agenda. We
Okay.
have one person before you, and then we will get to you.
Sounds good.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay. The next item on the agenda has to do with an area variance, Aaron La Conforma. I would entertain a motion to reopen the public hearing that was a continuance from the last meeting. Is there anyone from the public? I'll entertain that motion. I need a second for that, please.
Amy, was that a second? I think are you muted?
No, I'm not muted. I didn't hear the first one come through. Did you just make that, Lynn?
Yes, I made a motion to open the public hearing for Aaron La Conforma as a continuance from the last meeting.
I second. I thought you were entertaining a motion. Thank you. I
Okay.
second.
All right, thank you. All those in favor by aye?
Aye.
Okay. Public hearing is open. Is there anyone that would like to speak with regard to Mr. La Conforma's project?
Cheryl, did you want to say something?
Found
Can
the
you-
link and I made my way here and yes, thank you. I guess you can hear me now. I did send a letter last month and that stated how I felt about the project. The update includes having an opportunity to see the ribbons where or the corners were marked, and I appreciate them doing that to give us more of a visual. I think when it's built that a deck out that far on that side would have a significant impact on the feel of the neighborhood, kind of affecting the rural nature, which to me means elbow room and not people enjoying space, but that close to the road. And the thing that in my mind clinches my opinion that this should not be granted is that there are 3 other sides to the house. It wouldn't have so much of an impact on the Stonehenge side. They built a small deck on the one of the inside. I don't know which is north or whatever. But there are 3 other sides of the house, so I don't feel that it's essential. And I do feel it would impact the nature, the feel of the neighborhood. And I walk by many times a day. Thank you.
Can I ask you your address, please?
Yes, 82 Rocky Hill, 82.
82 Rocky Hill.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak with regard to Mr. La Conforma's project? I have received an email from one of the neighbors across the street. They have pulled their objection based on the size and the location of the stakes. So they are no longer in objection to the location and the size of the deck. Mr. La Conforma has added previous to this, when they spoke previously, that he would be willing to put hedges up to surround the section of the deck that was going to be built. There were a variety of questions that Kitty Brown had asked for with regard to this particular deck that was going to be built. Stacy, would you care to comment on any of those?
You're muted, Stace.
Good? You can hear me?
Yeah.
Here, you're fine, thank you.
So we received an email from Kitty that said, "Thank you, Leonard and Stacy, for helping us understand this application better by asking for stakes to be placed and for posting the missing materials on the website referenced in our earlier letter. It appears that this parcel and possibly some others at the lower end of Rocky Hill were approved before the R1 zoning was applied, and that is why the setbacks are half of what they are in the rest of the neighborhood. Do these lots fall under non-conforming, and if so, would this variance make them more non-conforming? Is that an additional consideration for the board to review?" So I'll just take a few moments to explain these questions in the order in which she's posted them. The statement is not entirely correct. The lots on the lower end of Rocky Hill, she didn't identify them, but I'm assuming they're all the lots from probably this property down to 32 on Rocky Hill Road. They were built they were subdivided in 1962. The area at that time was zoned residential 2, which was 2-family residential districts, which permitted 2-family residences and also single-family residences. Okay, each lot was required to have a minimum of 15,000 square feet, which isn't very much. It's approximately 1/3 of an acre. The required setbacks, though, were actually 50 feet in the front yard, 20 feet in the side yards, and 20 feet in the rear yards. And corner lots, they'll have the privilege of electing any street line as the front line, regardless of where any entrance doorways may be located in a building on such corner lot. Any corner lot in a residence zone, the least width of any side yard along the street lot line shall be not less than 35 feet. So it appears that when this house was built, it's a corner lot. So the portion of the lot line facing Stonehenge was being considered as the front yard based on the setbacks that are there if you look on the map. And the yard that is facing Rocky Hill was considered a side yard. So they have the 50 feet setback in the front yard along Stonehenge. They have the 35 feet setback from Rocky Hill. So that's how the house was oriented. I mean, that's what they had considered front yard and side yard. And that becomes a little bit more important when we get into other aspects of the code. But in today's code, in 76, when the zoning code was formally and officially adopted, okay, the zoning district became R1, residential 1 acre, which in essence did away with the 2-family dwellings. And it also required all new lots to be a 1 acre minimum, which is 43,560 square feet instead of 15,000 square feet. So they had to be much larger. And because of that, the code gave relief to the lots that were now non-conforming because of the zoning change. And that relief, okay, is 25 feet in the front yard and 8 feet in the side yards. But again, this is a corner lot, and the code requires corner lots to have the same setback as the same requirements as front yards. Follow me?
I do.
So actually, by this becoming non-conforming, it was granted more relief than it actually had when it was a conforming lot.
Can I ask a question before you go on, Stacey? The code requires us to grant the minimum area variance that's a reasonable amount, right?
That's a question for Joe.
Mr. Moriello?
Essentially, yes, Amy, you have that discretion.
Thank you.
Okay. So this lot is 0.69 acres. It's non-conforming. It's pre-existing non-conforming, and the front yard setbacks are 25 feet. Okay. The applicant has 31 feet 7 inches to the property line. The building is conforming to the current zoning. Okay. The applicant is requesting a 15-foot setback in lieu of a 25-foot setback. It's a 60% reduction in the required front yard setback. Okay. So she asks if these lots fall under non-conforming, and if so, would this variance make them more non-conforming? Yes, these lots are non-conforming. The variance does not make the lot more non-conforming. It makes the structure, okay, non-conforming. Okay, because the structure is currently conforming. So this variance will make the structure non-conforming. That's why they're here. They're asking for that relief. Okay, there's a difference between a non-conforming lot and a non-conforming structure. Okay, and she asks if that's an additional consideration for the board to review, and I bring that back to the board to answer that question.
Okay. Comments from the board? Amy, you see your hand is up?
Yes, when I got this map, I drove by the house twice, and it seems to me that the footprint on the map doesn't quite conform to what I'm seeing on the property. For instance, on the north side, where it says deck, and there's a tiny deck and a tiny set of stairs going down. I think that deck is larger and the stairs are different. On the west side, there's a set of stairs that don't appear to exist in real life. I don't know whether those are a proposed addition or what. And I also have a question about the 8-foot wide proposed side of the deck. Presumably that's where the door would be, but is there no way to get onto that deck except through the house? It doesn't look like there are any staircases on the deck.
I can answer your question in regards to the survey map in regards to the north side small deck. This is an older survey map. The applicant has a permit for a deck, an enlarged deck on the north side of the house, and it doesn't show on the survey map. And then the applicant has also built a deck on the west side of the house. So those outside stairs are no longer there, and there is a west deck there too, which he also, it is a legal structure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And what about, is there any way, if this is built as proposed, is there any way to get onto the deck besides going through the inside of the house? No stairs are shown off this deck. That seems very unusual to me.
That's a question for the applicant.
I believe there were stairs. He did speak that there would be stairs walking toward the north direction.
Well,
Is that correct?
That would enlarge the proposal compared to what we're seeing on the map. We should see an accurate proposal for what he wants to do, right?
We can't hear Aaron.
I can't hear him.
Aaron, there you go.
Hello?
You said, there, now we can hear you.
Okay, good. There, at one point, we thought possibly there would be one stair, but there is no stairs as the deck is at the grade. It's a step up from the grade level, from the grass. So
Okay.
there will not be stairs, but the deck will be accessible from that side that's open from the grades as well.
Thank you.
Yes, that was the answer. I'm sorry you guys couldn't hear me.
Aaron, is that, can I talk?
Sure.
Aaron?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me?
I can, yep.
Yes. Is that being used as a single or a two-family house?
Single.
Okay, thank you. Okay, it's time for board discussion. Anyone have any particular comments or questions?
Could I just ask, who was the neighbor that withdrew their opposition?
I don't know, to tell you the truth. I have an email from the, and I'll read it to you. His neighbors across the street had stopped by to pull their objection to the project once they were able to see the plans. I don't know about other neighbors, however. So
we don't know who this is.
I don't know who it is.
I'm concerned because I had a conversation with Aaron, but I did not remove my objections. I said I told him I made my say in the last meeting, and that was it. If someone's trying to tell you that I removed my objections, someone's pulling a fast one.
You know, I sent a notice to the secretary in regard to this, that any notification similar to the one that was just mentioned needs to have a name attached to it.
Yeah. If this doesn't have a name attached to it, I'd like to make sure it's not considered.
Okay. Are you the person that lives directly across the street?
Rotate across.
Okay. Alana, is there anything you can add to that?
All I can say is that I had an email exchange with Aaron, who seemed to believe that he spoke with a neighbor who was.
You told me you would withdraw your objections, so I must have misunderstood that. It wasn't a letter. It wasn't an anonymous letter. It was.
Okay, that's
stopped over, and you said you weren't even going to be on this call, is what I remembered. But maybe
right. My point was that I didn't like it, but I wasn't gonna Bob, I'd already spoken my piece.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I thought you told me.
No,
that.
I'm sorry about the misunderstanding, Aaron.
Yeah, it wasn't an anonymous thing. I thought that was good news to be shared. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, it should have come from me to the board if that was the case. That's all. Okay.
Sorry, guys.
Catherine, do you have any questions?
I did. I just wanted to ask again, because some of the board members were not at the last meeting. If you could just share why the alternative for a deck built toward the Stonehenge side of the property was considered but not proposed.
I went over that with my builder, and apparently the grade is so high there, I would have to do significant grading work and basically regrade that entire area to build something in that direction. And then I can't go to the left. If you're facing out of the steps, I can't go to the left because I have a HVAC compressor there, and I have my oil thing there, and I have all the wires and everything there. So it would literally have to be like, I was told it's unbuildable, was basically what I was told. I told it would be absolutely insane to consider that. And it would have to be like this thing that comes out like this and not off to the side. It would be even more oddly, it would even look even odder off of the house. Is what it's. And I was told that the grade is so high that the bottom of the deck would be on, there was no room for pillars or something, because the bottom of the deck would literally be at like the on the ground level. So we explored that. It seemed actually even more difficult to do.
Thanks for clarifying. I just also want to share with everyone in this meeting, I do live in the neighborhood. I live on Stonehenge Avenue. I do not know the applicant, and all the information I have regarding the application came through the zoning board. So I don't feel it's necessary to recuse myself from this application.
I too should mention, since we have two new members, that I own the building at the corner of Rocky Hill Road and Route 32 North where the dog training business is. And I have and see no reason or need to recuse myself from this particular project, as I only know the applicant as a name and a number as it appears on the application. John, do you have any comments or questions, please? I can't hear you. Sorry, if you're talking, I can't hear you.
Yeah, sorry.
That's all right.
Just since Stacy brought up this thing that is new to me, it being a corner lot, and the front yard is now Rocky Hill, but it used to be Stonehenge. Is that right?
No, the code requires the front yard is Stonehenge. A parcel can only have one front yard, one rear yard, and two side yards. Okay. The front yard to this parcel is based on the way the house was originally built, was considered Stonehenge. Okay, the side that's on Stonehenge. Yeah. So the side that's on Rocky Hill is a side yard, except the code requires corner lots. Okay, so both yards, so in this case, the front yard and the side yard still have to meet front yard requirements.
Okay, thanks, I got it.
Amy, go ahead, please.
I have another question about on the north side, as Catherine said, where there's a small deck. It seems to me that if you put a larger deck, whether you had to do some grading or change the shape of the deck, perhaps, if you put a larger deck in the place where you currently have a small deck shown on the north side, that you could enjoy your deck without having any nonconformity at all. And one other thing, I came down to see how this would look from from Stonehenge. I came up that road twice at dusk. If there should be any light whatsoever on that enclosed porch, I assume it would come from the house and shine toward the deck. And I think it would interfere with traffic visibility, because it kind of looms over the Rocky Hill side. Maybe not so much on the Stonehenge side, but the house is already considerably farther forward than all the other houses in that row. And it would really block the visibility, in my opinion, at night when there's a light on.
The house would block visibility at night when there's a light on.
If there were a light attached to the house shining on the deck, which is a typical arrangement for a deck.
Oh, there's bushes there, Amy. You're not going to see anything but a bunch of bushes.
There are no bushes on this plan.
They'll be there eventually.
Well, then we need to see something about that.
They could be a condition. They could be a condition as far as the,
Well, I think that would be essential because I think the deck as proposed kind of towers over Rocky Hill Road, and it comes too close to blocking the intersection for my comfort. So if there is going to be a screening of bushes, I want to see them, and I want to see how close they come to the intersection, because if you're going to plant, this deck is going to be at least 6 feet off the ground on the lower end, probably more. And if you're going to plant bushes to screen the deck so that light doesn't flood the neighborhood, you're going to need large, expensive bushes, and they're going to take up a lot of room in this 15 feet that you have left to the road, which will block the intersection.
Will the bushes be offensive as well, Amy?
It's not that the bushes would be offensive. In your map, you only have 15.7 feet to do that planting. That's not very much.
Well,
They would have to be substantial size bushes because your deck is going to be pretty high off the ground level.
I've been told that that's a separate process. I've looked into it. I've spoken to Stacy about it, and I posed a separate variance scenario. So there's no way I can deal with that at the moment.
I'm sorry, Aaron. I think you misunderstood. I think you gravely misunderstood. I think I told you, I gave you the section of code and required to living fences and screening. And I said that if you were proposing any kind of screening, you needed to make that proposal to the zoning board.
As a separate variance.
No, you don't need a variance to plant. You don't need a variance to plant the living fence.
In addition to that, if you only have 15 feet to plant bushes, they're going to come right up to the edge of the road. It's definitely going to block the intersection, the visibility, as you come down Stonehenge toward Rocky Hill. There just isn't enough room. That's why I'm suggesting that there's plenty of room on the other side of your house, on the north side.
Unfortunately, my septic tank is over there. I can only build so far, and it's not reasonable to ask me to tear down and reconstruct an already pre-existing deck.
No, I wouldn't want you to do that, but you have your septic system way off on the side of the lot here. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, then.
Well, it's not off the side of the lot. No, it's the actual septic is. I've looked into all this, Amy.
Well, it doesn't matter whether you've looked into it. We have to look into it. And if you show your septic over there, that's one thing. But if the septic is actually coming close to the house so that you can't put a deck there, you need to show us that.
The current deck that is there was the size proportionally to where we were able to build. And the septic tank was where that was. So there's some things that, you know.
Is that a septic tank or a septic field?
Both. The tank is close to the house. The field is further away from the house.
tanks are typically 8 to 10 feet from the house.
Right. So how close is your septic field to the house?
I don't know off the top of my head. Sorry.
Well, it looks like you have at least 75 feet there. So you could put in a deck going north of the house without needing a variance.
Lynn,
Yes, Joe.
if I may, in terms of an alternative off the north end, I think the point maybe is well taken. The location of the septic, I see the well located, and typically there is some separation, there must be some separation between the septic and the well.
100 feet.
So when I saw the septic on the map, as it's plotted, I assumed that was a correct location. But in response to Amy's question, it sounded like you're saying that the septic is closer to the north end of the house than is shown on the map.
I'm not saying that, but I do want to just mention that in
No,
an
I thought the
overall-
applicant said the septic is closer to the house than is shown on the map.
Well, we've had a new
And that-
septic put in probably since that map was drawn. A much larger tank than that was previously in there. So that's one another thing to be considered.
Well, where is the tank?
If you want to stop over, Amy, I'll show you exactly where it is.
Okay.
That really doesn't help the rest of the board schematically though on the diagram.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the diagram. The tank is right here.
Sorry, I can't see that.
Yeah, for the record, Aaron, I think you have to describe it in terms of items on your drawing, especially
Aaron,
at this type of meeting.
If you have a digital copy, you can share your screen if that's easier.
It's not on this isn't on this computer.
Oh, okay.
The reality is, guys, that you're proposing that I tear down a current deck and build this deck there? Where are you looking on my property? Because maybe I'm misunderstanding this whole concept. Where on this map, and when you guys want to draw it on your map and hold it up, where are you proposing I build a deck? I'm extremely confused at what direction we're heading in here. But if someone could clarify it to me, maybe I'm not understanding where
Our job is not to propose to you where we should build it. Our job is to evaluate a variance.
Well, we're talking about building a new deck right now in a different location, which is not
What I'm saying, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is,
I'm sorry, it sounds like you're proposing that I build a different deck in a different location.
no, what
Amy?
I'm saying,
May I speak, please?
yes,
The applicant has a proposal. That is the location of the deck. It's really not our advice to tell him where to or where not to put the deck. We need to make a decision as it is presented to us as it is.
exactly.
If we give it a yay or a nay, if we give it a nay, then he has to come back with a plan B.
Exactly.
Len,
I was trying to say.
just if I may, the criteria for the granting of the area variance and Aaron, this may help you too. One of the criteria there is whether the benefit sought by the applicant, and here I think seems to me to be a deck that is accessible from inside the house, which I think was one of the reasons that you expressed why you wanted to put it on the south end of the house, because there's an entrance there. But it's whether the benefit sought by the applicant can be achieved by some method feasible for the applicant to pursue other than an area variance. So when I think Amy asked the question, is there another method where you can achieve the benefit of a larger deck accessible from the house? The question is, can that go on the north end of the house as opposed to the south end where the setbacks seem to be the issue?
Fortunately, I don't believe that it can be.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear it.
I would say that it cannot be, is my personal belief.
And would you care to support that? Is that because of the location of the septic?
if you're talking
or
about,
personal choice.
when you say north end of the house, when you say this deck is, you're calling it on the north side of the house, correct? The one I'm proposing.
Again, I'm looking,
This is
you know, I'm confined by the drawing that came with the application. So I'm looking at that end of the house that is farthest from Rocky Hill that shows a deck and a set of stairs. So I'm assuming that is the north end of the house.
where it says deck, right, with the little stairs. That's
A deck with a little line and 3 or 4 stairs, correct?
correct. So there already is that deck there.
Correct. Yep.
So that deck is, as just Stacy can tell you, we just had to make modifications to that deck, I believe. So, and it had to be changed. We had to add something to it for some reason, so that there's a deck there.
Yeah.
That's been recently completed, and it's a small deck.
Mm-hmm.
So is someone saying, what, I should tear that down? And what's the thought process?
No, I think the question was, is there some way for you to achieve the benefit you're trying to achieve other than the requested variance?
The other entrance point is.
So the question is always, are there areas or alternative sites where the same benefit could be achieved?
I don't believe there's anywhere else that I could build a deck on this house at all that makes any more sense. A lot of thought and planning and opinions and contractors and builders and building department and everything has been gone into the best way to approach this. So there has been a lot of thought put into it. You know, I understand someone just looking at it from the outside right now saying, why can't you throw it over there? It's virtually, there's a deck there. So.
Right. Again, I'm assuming some thought process went into.
That deck has been there for years, so
Okay.
it's just
All right.
a smaller entry point deck that goes to a very tiny door. Unfortunately, on this side of the house, there's French doors that and the grade is better to go. This was just the ideal area to solve the entrance point issue, because I have stairs that are just, they have no stairs. It's just 2 French doors that are just there up in the air. That there's, you know, that it makes the perfect area to complete this on that side of the house. So I don't see any real other way to build anything. I proposed the privacy hedges, not because I want them, but because I was trying to appease everybody's, you know, concerns about the look and the this and the that. So that's an expensive thing to even consider, to try to appease my neighbors. But I'm trying to appease my neighbors here. And be a fair guy. I've done everything everyone's asked me.
Len, Amy has questions.
Yes, Amy.
Okay, I just want to say, Aaron, I'm not telling you where you can build a deck, but we have to look at the application in front of us. And the application in front of us does not leave room, in my opinion, for screening with shrubbery. There may be a couple of shrubs in front of.
Oh, Stacy,
that's not enough. Wait, let me finish. So that's one problem, is you don't have room in 15.7 feet to put in shrubbery screening, and in any case, you haven't shown it to us. A second problem is the business of the lights glaring onto that intersection, which could be fixed if you put the deck in a different place.
Right now, I have no proposal to put any lights on the deck.
Let me finish. You spoke for a long time. Now it's my turn to speak.
You actually interrupted me, Amy. I was
Okay, let's calm down now.
May I speak? Okay.
Amy, take the floor.
Thank you. So one problem is getting too close to the intersection. One problem is it's a very substantial variance. One problem is you can't put enough screening in there without blocking the intersection very substantially. So from what we see, I would be inclined to disapprove it, but there are other things that you could do, which would include enlarging the deck if you wanted to. So people are trying to be helpful by making those suggestions. So the application as it stands I don't have a very high opinion of it.
Aaron, can I ask you a question? The French doors that were in the front,
Yes,
were they originally built with the house?
there were French doors there originally, yes.
Okay. Have they ever been changed?
They were, new French doors were put in, but it was always French doors there. I mean, when I bought the house, the French doors were probably the original French doors.
Stacy, can you verify that?
She's on mute.
You're
Oh, she's
muted,
on mute.
Stacy.
I do recall him replacing those doors when he
Okay.
closed the porch. But
Okay.
I think the opening is there.
Thank you. Okay, we have, are there any more comments from any of the members? Okay, we have 5 questions that need to be asked or answered by the applicant. I will read those questions. Whether an undesirable change will be produced by the character of the neighborhood or a detriment to nearby properties will be created by the granting of this area variance.
I say no.
Whether the benefits sought by the applicant can be achieved by some method feasible for the applicant to pursue other than this area variance.
I don't believe so.
Is that a yes or a, yes or a no?
Len?
Amy, we'll have discussion after these 5 questions are over.
Okay, but I couldn't tell who was speaking. Was that Aaron who was giving his answer of no?
He didn't give a yes or a no answer. That's what I'm waiting for.
Oh, the question was, am I able to achieve this? Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
I will do that. Whether the benefits sought by the applicant can be achieved by some method feasible for the applicant to pursue other than an area variance.
There is not, no.
Whether the requested area variance is substantial.
No, it's not.
Whether the proposed variance will have an adverse effect or impact on the physical or environmental conditions in the neighborhood or district.
Definitely not.
Whether the alleged difficulty was self-created, which consideration shall be relevant to the decision of the Zoning Board of Appeals, but shall not necessarily preclude the granting of the area variance.
Was this sorry, say that again? Was this?
I'll read it again. Whether the alleged difficulty was self-created, which consideration shall be relevant to the decision of the Zoning Board of Appeals, but shall not necessarily preclude the granting of the area variance.
What's the difficulty? I'm sorry, I'm not, what is the difficulty?
The difficulty is the building of the deck.
In that particular location, as opposed to in some other location.
As it's presented to us.
Right.
That's like the same as the other question. I don't believe building the deck is difficult at all. I think makes perfect sense to me. That's why I'm here, you know.
Are you answering yes or no?
I don't believe there was no self-inflicted difficulty.
So your answer is no? Okay, members of the board, we now are discussion on this. Amy, John, Steve, Catherine?
Len?
You're next, Joe.
No, I'm just thinking, is the board at a point where perhaps the public hearing should be closed and then the board will discuss and do its deliberations? As opposed to all of this being part of the public hearing.
Okay. Okay, I'll entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
I move to close the hearing.
Thank you, Catherine. All those in favor signify by aye.
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 guys
Public
make,
hearing closed.
do we discuss this today, or what's the next step? Do you come back?
The next step now is the members of the board will discuss, and then we will take a vote
Then when do we communicate again?
in about a few minutes when we're done discussing.
Do we log back off or stay?
No,
here?
no, we're all going to stay attached.
Okay, great.
Members of the board?
So, Len, these are my thoughts. The orientation of this house is unusual for the neighborhood. It could be related to the zoning that was in place back in the time. The front door does not face Rocky Hill Road. It faces the westerly direction. The French doors were pre-existing, facing out onto an area where topography is challenging to build a new deck. So I don't think that is self-created. Where I'm struggling a little bit is with the fact that is this a substantial variance or not? The setback is encroached on quite a bit, and I think Stacy gave a percentage, so I don't know if Stacy can weigh in again on what that was.
60%.
But that's kind of where my 60%, that's where my thoughts are. I think that this is an unusually sited house that does create difficulties in alternatives.
John?
Yes, I just my thoughts. I put a lot of weight on the fact of the size of the encroachment. It's substantial. I agree with that point. And I'm not completely convinced about the impossibility of an alternative location. It may well involve some additional difficulties or even expense, but with regard to impossibility, I'm not convinced.
Amy?
On the first question, whether an undesirable change would be produced in the character of the neighborhood, I think that a deck that comes so close to the edge of the road at an intersection is an undesirable change. And I think that at night, when lights are shining off the deck onto the street, it's a very undesirable change. I agree with the two of you that the variance is substantial, and it seems to me it's self-created because I can see other places where a deck might be sited on the property.
Okay. Stephen, any questions? Any thoughts?
You're muted.
Okay. I have looked at this also. I have heard from the neighborhood with regard to what they perceive as an undesirable building of something. The 60% being offered is quite substantial. I do believe there are alternatives. And I think that they need to be looked at. I think it would be a wise decision on the applicant to look for a more alternative way so that the granting of the variance would not have such a large amount of a percentage needed to successfully grant it. So at this point in time, I would make, are there any other comments again from any of the other board members?
Just one suggestion, Len, and again,
Yes,
because
Joe.
of, these types of meetings are so new and different, and the decision needs to be some written decision, if you will, even if that decision is going to be embodied in written minutes, which I assume it will be. I mean,
Yes.
Yeah, I'm taking them.
there are still minutes. Okay, thanks, Lana. Perhaps if someone feels that they want to make a motion, perhaps they could make a motion pointing out the reasons for the making of the motion, especially in view of the requirements that the board can then consider and act on a resolution as it's finally framed.
I
As
understand.
opposed to just a vote.
I
based on
understand.
Comments, okay. Amy has her hand up.
Oh, guys, sorry, the well is in the other area where this would be, where you're proposing. The well is there. That's the problem on the other side. Sorry.
Amy, you had your hand up?
I just wondered if you wanted me to make a motion incorporating specifics, as Len said,
Yes, please.
as Joe said, excuse me.
That would be, you may.
Okay, so I moved that the application be denied because an undesirable change would be produced in the character of the neighborhood by impeding sightlines at the intersection, because there are other methods the applicant might pursue to achieve his goals, because the requested variance is substantial.
By how, list how, I would say with the percentage that they are asking for? Include that in?
Because the setback is only, would reduce the required setback by 60%. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. That's enough. That's my motion.
Okay. Entertain a second.
A second.
Thank you. John? All those in favor of agreeing with Amy signify by aye.
Len, do you want me to take a roll call? Because it's
Yeah, you may.
Okay.
So
So,
Amy wasn't, Amy voted against it. John voted against it.
Wait. Just
Voted
for
in
the
favor
record,
of the motion.
Gina, you're voting aye on a denial. So
Right.
I am a denial, yes.
The motion was to deny the requested variance, right?
Thank you.
Okay.
So I'll just start calling names and you can say aye or nay. So Amy,
Aye.
John,
Aye.
Leonard,
Aye.
Steve. Are you muted, Steve?
Aye.
Great, thank you. Oh, and is that an aye?
Yes, he said aye.
Okay, for some reason she's.
And the last one is Catherine.
So am I voting aye in approval of Amy's motion?
Yes. So you're voting in approval of denying it. So is that
I actually vote nay
okay.
For the motion, specifically regarding the character of the neighborhood. I have concerns about the percentage of the setback, but not the other factors discussed.
Okay, the motion, I believe the motion carries then with,
The motion carries.
yeah.
You have a 4-1 vote, Alana?
Yes.
Okay.
Guys, where are my options on appealing this?
We are the Zoning Board of Appeals. You can present in 1 year's time. You can present the same plan if you would like, or your option is to present a different plan, either that is more conforming or is not as substantial.
Gotcha.
Is that correct, Stacy?
Actually, we have to look that up. Joe, do you know the answer to that off the top of your head?
Well, I mean, there are alternatives. There's really no other board that you appeal to following this determination. Okay. If someone feels that they are aggrieved by a determination of the Zoning Board of Appeals, and the denial of the variance, you would have the right to bring an action in Supreme Court pursuant to Article 78 of the Civil Practice Law and Rules. I would strongly urge you to discuss that with an attorney so that you get a good and complete answer as to exactly when the time limitations are to bring that type of an action in Supreme Court. There are very strict time limits and procedural issues that have to be done to make that appeal, to give the court jurisdiction over that appeal, if you will.
Terrific. Thank you for that information.
Okay.
So just to answer Len's other question, can he bring another application, a different application to the board if he needed a variance for the same location?
Yes, you would be entitled to bring another application to the board. It would be a new application, almost requiring a rehearing, and the board would have to make a determination to rehear a variance that had previously been denied. So that application needs to be, I think, carefully considered in light of all of the issues presented here, but you're privileged to bring another application for a new or different or lesser variance.
But Stacy, just for the record, I can build, what, 6 foot out? What's the max I can build if I want to move forward with?
You need a 25-foot setback from Stonehenge Road and from Rocky Hill Road.
So the deck I can build, so while we're all here together, what's the size of the deck I'm allowed to build right now?
I don't know. I would have to take a good look at your plan.
I think it was 6 feet out. I'm not sure, 6 or 7. I'm not
I
sure.
can't give you an actual answer right now, but we can look at it at another time.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so my recommendation would be, Aaron, for you to meet with Stacy, see if you can find a particular size deck that would work, that would not require a variance, and then she would issue a building permit if it was in the guidelines of acceptable setbacks.
Gotcha. Sounds great, guys.
Okay, thank you for your time.
Have a great one. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, goodbye now. Okay, next item on the agenda. Mariana Kushner.
Hi, how are you guys?
Good evening. I guess first off, we all have the applications in front of us, but it generally works well if you could explain to us what you would like to do. And before you do that, I would ask that all of the members take a look at the application where on page 2, it says the height of the fence to be built up to, that should be 10 feet, not 10 inches. 2 lines indicate the inch mark. So if you would all make that.
Yeah, sorry, I grew up in a country with metric system, so a little confused still.
That's okay.
But I mean
Yes.
10 feet.
Yes, I did speak with Stacy. So all of the language within this application needs to be amended based on a small clerical error. So we don't want 10 inches, we want 10 feet. Okay, so if you could please explain to the board to clarify your application, the need for a 10-foot fence.
Sure. Let me just introduce myself and discuss the issue here. I don't know if you guys had the chance to read the review the application and read through all of the exhibits. I try to be really detailed with all the documentation of what happened. But in any case, again, my name is Mariana Kushner. I've owned this house since 2013. When I purchased the house, what attracted to me is a very beautiful Cedar Ridge Road. It's it's parallel to the rail trail. It's close to town. It was very convenient for me to commute back to the city as I was still working in the city, proximity to the bus station, but still having a kind of feel as if you are secluded here. And I feel like when I purchased the house, I purchased it because it was a very neat block. Every house has a very neat appearance, and people take care of their property. And that's, you know, I paid that price for the house and for that location on that premise. So the neighbor next door, he was already there when I moved in. My understanding is that he wasn't living there full time. And about like 2 years back or so, he moved in. And even since those, you know, like there was a gradual deterioration in like what I have to stare at on the daily basis outside of my windows. And as I pass by, and since he kind of moved back in, I think he maybe owns some property somewhere else, but it just turned into this horrific scene of a junkyard, something that just doesn't belong in the neighborhood, doesn't belong on this block. It's something that devalues my property, it devalues neighbors' property. And it's very upsetting because it's occurring, you know, my property taxes has increased by 20% since I moved in. But I feel like this situation directly impacts my property value, and I'm very upset about that. So I tried to reason with the guy. I don't think there is a way to reason with him. I tried to contact, you know, the town of New Paltz with complaints that I feel like the code is not really somehow not really enforceable on him, or he knows how to game the system. You know, either, oh, okay, he will get a warning and then he will sit on it for 30 days, then he'll get another warning and he will sit on it for another 30 days. And then he will decide he will start building something, but he won't finish, and that accumulates more trash and trash. So I basically, you know, at some point you're like, okay, then I'm going to build a aesthetically pleasing structure, a fence, very simple structure. And, you know, it's very premium, nice materials, which are clear planks, very expensive. But it's something that's going to blend in really well. And it's like a very logical solution to protect me from that view and to protect my property from further devaluation. That's how I see that. And so what happens, and also if you flip through the application, you'll see a bunch of photos attached. You can see the photos of how the neighborhood property looks like that I'm staring at. It's literally a junkyard. But also you can see that my property is downslope, is located downslope from his property. So the effect of that is when I'm looking outside of my windows, then the objects things that he has accumulated, and now he's building sheds, which are absolutely horrendous looking. Those things look so much bigger from me being downhill from him than if it was the opposite. It's just a simple visual effect of that. So if you refer to the code is 6 foot up to on the side lawn, 4 foot for the front. So what I'm saying, this is not sufficient. I want to have this very aesthetically pleasing barrier that's not going to impact anyone, and this barrier will blend in with the trees, with the neighborhood, and I need it to be higher than what's allowed in the code, and that's a very simple story.
Thank you.
Seems like much simpler than what the guy before me had to deal with.
Okay. What we need to do, the next step in the process, is to set what is called a public hearing. And what will happen with regard to a public hearing, you will notify all of your neighbors surrounding you.
Mhm.
and you will put a sign in the front yard indicating to them that there is an application in front of the Zoning Board of Appeals for a 10-foot fence. And that can be done by contacting Alana at 255-0102,
Mhm.
extension 3.
I can also just email you tomorrow, Mariana, and I can
Okay.
send you all the
Yeah, that's
material.
fine.
Okay,
So,
You'll
so
take-
I'm a little confused. What was the purpose of then today's meeting? Since you guys
Today-
had my application.
basically to let everyone on the board know what your intention is and what you intend to do. And the next step will be to let the public know what is going to be done. If they have any objections or any comments with regard to the height of the fence, then it's that time that they will be able to speak. But it is not a time now when the zoning board or the members comment. It is at the public hearing time. When the public hearing is ended, then they will have the discussion. Did you hear the 5 questions that were read to the last applicant?
Yes, yes.
Okay, those same questions will be read to you, and you will answer them, and then we will go forward from there with a vote.
And so when would that next meeting be?
The next meeting will be January 12th. I believe January 12th.
All right. I mean, I wish, I'm just like really a little bit confused about the process because I just don't understand why this seems like that could have been done via email and I could have already called my neighbors for the public hearing. I just don't understand all the delays.
That it's not a deliberate delay. It's part of the process. The neighbors will need to be notified, and then you will sign an affidavit that all the neighbors were notified. That way we know that everyone was duly notified and the process can continue. The determination, if there are no problems with regard to anything involved in this, could be made at the next meeting. It's not a guarantee, it's not a promise, but the probability and the likelihood of it happening at the next meeting is more than more than likely to happen.
All right, and do I need to pay another application fee to appear?
No. What you need to do is to contact Alana, and she will provide you with all of the necessary forms and paperwork that you will need to, with regard to notifying your neighbors. They will be notified through the U.S. mail.
All right, that's all good. I can do that. I wish I was told about this ahead of time. I could have done this before this meeting. So
No, you could not have done it before the meeting. It doesn't work that way. That's not part of the process. Okay.
Different pace here. Okay, got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Len, by the way, the next meeting is the January 13th.
Did I miss by? Oh, you know what it is? I probably looked at the old.
Yeah.
I looked at the Tuesday. There it is, January 13th. I stand corrected. Thank you.
I don't know if you want to make a motion to set it for then or.
Len, you also have a question from Amy.
Amy, you have a question?
This is actually a question for Len or Stacy. That I see that the applicant says that there's a camera facing toward her lot and likely recording movements on my property, she says. So is there anything we need to know or do about that that's separate from an area variance?
No, nothing that we would do. No.
Okay.
Okay, I entertain a motion, if I could please, for an area variance for Mariana Kushnar for a 10-foot fence to be located at 16 Cedar Ridge Road in New Paltz.
I make a motion.
Stephen seconds that.
The motion is to set the public hearing, right?
That is the motion to set the public hearing, yes. All those signify by aye?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Public hearing will be January 13th. Okay, next item on the agenda. Joe, is there anything that I left out? No?
Nope.
Thank you. Okay, the next item on the agenda has to do with a September 14th building inspector decision to allow a bike path go through a buffer zone. I guess one of the first questions I would like to ask, or that we should ask if we're going to make this decision, are there any members of our board that we either past or present members of the ENCB?
Nope.
No? Okay, good. So then we can answer it decision unbiased. Now we have, and we heard during the public comment time, a letter from Linda Wells, Barbara Peterson, Roger Roloff, and Daniel Schneinwind, who they indicate that they are all New Paltz residents. In regard to that same situation, I have a letter here from Catherine Zalantis. Has everyone received that letter?
Yes.
I see John saying yes, Stephen saying yes, Amy? Amy shaking her head yes?
Can you give me the date of that letter?
That letter is dated December 4th.
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to read that letter into the minutes also. This letter is from Catherine Zalantis from Silverberg and Zalantis, dated December 4th. Dear Chair and members of the Zoning Board, we represent BFB New Paltz LLC and Trans Hudson Management, collectively BFB, and write in opposition to the unprecedented appeal from the Town of New Paltz Environmental Condition Board, ENCB, seeking to overturn the September 14th, 2020 determination of the New Paltz building inspector, Stacy Delarey. The building inspector correctly and properly determined that BFB's proposed concept plan does not require a design standard from the zoning code 140-22. I'm not going to read all the numbers every time.
Len?
Yes, Joe.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. If all of the members have received the letter,
yes,
if it's going to be accepted by the board as part of the appeal, and typically we might read letters into the record for something that would be a public hearing.
Okay.
This is really not a public hearing. It's a hearing on the appeal that's been brought by the NCB. So the ZBA hears and decides appeal, but it isn't really a public hearing. Generally speaking, the appellant, in this case, the NCB, if there's a representative here, if they want to put in their position with respect to their appeal, they would. If they, then generally the building inspector side, the town's side, would be entitled to put in its response to the appeal. I think the letter from Zalantis can be accepted by the board in the course of the hearing. I just don't know that there's a necessity to read it out loud into the record, but.
Okay, then would it I entertain a motion to accept the letter from Silverberg and Zalantis as part of the record in this decision, dated December 4th, signed by Catherine Zalantis Use 1, 2. It is a 3-page letter.
And I think that would be with the understanding that the letter comes directly from an applicant currently going through a land use process who would be directly affected by the decision of this board either way,
Yes, I
as
understand.
opposed to just some writing that comes in from someone from the general public.
I understand.
Mr. Lithgow is here representing the building inspector's office. I believe that Ms. Solantis is here. By all means, if either of you have any concerns about what I just said, I'm certainly more than happy to listen.
Has Mr. Lithgow seen the Zelantis letter?
That was going to be my next question.
I did have an opportunity to review it this weekend.
Thank you.
Incidentally, hello, George.
Okay. Catherine, are you here? Catherine Zelantis?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Good
Would you
evening.
like to speak?
I'm happy to speak now, but if you want to allow the applicant to make their presentation first and I can respond, that's fine. But if you'd like to hear it now, that's perfectly acceptable also.
I would, okay. I have not seen the applicant on the
I
screen.
am the applicant.
Oh, you are?
I'm representing the
You are there.
applicant. Hi.
Okay, good. Okay, I'm sorry. State your name, please.
My name is Ingrid Heckel, and I'm chair of the New Paltz Environmental Conservation Board.
Okay, Ingrid. Please state your case.
Thank you. Good evening, Chairman Loza and members of the Town Zoning Board of Appeals. As I said, my name is Ingrid. I'm chair of the Town of New Paltz Environmental Conservation Board, or ENCB, which I have served on for the past 5 years. The ENCB is established in Chapter 12 of Town Code to assist the town in the development of sound open space planning and preservation and protection of natural and scenic resources. And among our duties, the ENCB regularly reviews applications referred to us by the Planning Board, providing environmental data and conservation recommendations. We are an advisory board. So we're here tonight to appeal an interpretation of the town building inspector with regards to Chapter 140-22.2 D2F, which sets standards for a required, quote, substantial vegetated natural buffer, unquote, along the New York State Thruway. During the gateway rezoning process, the ENCB provided recommendations for natural buffers along the Thruway because of the critical role they play in mitigating air and noise pollution. We have great respect for our building inspector's knowledge and interpretation of the code, but we feel compelled in this very unusual instance to defend this statute. And I'm going to share my screen now just to show a few visuals and excerpts from the code. Just one moment, please. There we go. So vegetated buffers along the Thruway provide a critical public health benefit to New Paltz residents and visitors. Pollutants directly emitted from vehicles are found in high concentrations near major roads and highways. In addition, roadway traffic also emits brake and tire debris and throws road dust up into the air. And many scientific studies have found that people who live, work, or attend school near major roads appear to be more at risk for a variety of short and long-term health effects. Fortunately, there are low-cost natural solutions, including the preservation or establishment of forested buffers, which are proven to be effective at filtering out and reducing the concentration of air pollution coming from highways. The integrity of the Thruway buffer protections in the gateway zoning should be upheld for the health and safety of town residents, visitors, and workers, including the future occupants and users of the site in question, as well as the future emergency services facility and playground that will soon be constructed just up the road on North Putt Corners. This appeal relates to an interpretation made by the town building inspector with regards to at the request of the Town Planning Board with regards to Trans Hudson Management Corporation's most recent conceptual site plan shown here, dated June 29th, 2020, which proposes to site a 10-foot wide paved path for the Empire State Trail through the middle of the required 30-foot substantial vegetated natural buffer. ENCB fully supports routing the Empire State Trail through this property. The trail can and should be kept out of the required substantial vegetated natural buffer. And I'll use my cursor here to indicate the approximate, this is the location on this concept plan where the trail would be routed along the boundary with the thruway through, and it's shown right in the middle of that buffer. According to New York State DOT design guidelines, the minimum width for the Empire State Trail is 10 feet with at least a 2-foot shoulder on either side that is maintained with mowed grass. Thus, the proposed disturbance would in fact be at least 14 feet of the 30-foot substantial vegetated natural buffer on the Trans Hudson site, leaving a mere 16 feet of vegetation, which is currently proposed to be divided in half with 8 feet on either side of the trail. So that's just 8 feet of buffer on either side there. Of course, it could be redesigned. Maybe it'll be 16 feet on one side. Regardless,
was getting ready to come down.
There's some noise interference. Could someone please mute themselves? Thank you.
Oh, poor ass.
Okay, thanks. Chapter 140-22.2 D2F reads, quote, properties adjoining the New York State Thruway I-87 must maintain, establish, or enhance as needed a substantial vegetated natural buffer, which may be supplemented with evergreens. The landscape buffer must have a minimum depth of 30 feet from any property line along the thruway. I'm sorry, I have the wrong thing here. That was the definition of the code. And the zoning needs to be read and interpreted in tandem with the comprehensive plan amendment for the Route 299 Gateway Corridor. And the objectives for the Main Street Mixed Use District specifically call for the maintenance or establishment of a substantial vegetated buffer along the New York State Thruway property, and for limitations on clearing and grading to protect mature trees and maintain existing topography. And I'll note that having walked this property, there are several large mature trees that could be preserved in this 30-foot buffer. The building inspector's determination reads that Chapter 140-22.2 D2F sets standards for the required buffer along the New York State Thruway. As stated in the definition, the purpose of a buffer is to protect uses on an adjoining lot from impacts of uses on the lot containing the buffer. And this is the definition of buffer strips. This buffer is distinct from the code's definition of buffer strip, which does not allow paved areas, unquote. The building inspector concludes that a 10-foot paved trail to be located in the middle of the required substantial vegetated natural buffer would, quote, not be prohibited by the code as it is not inconsistent with nor contrary to the purpose of such buffer. We believe this interpretation fails to consider the meaning of key words defining this specific buffer in the code and overlooks its purpose. So let's begin with keywords defining the buffer. The Gateway Zoning Amendment does not define the terms substantial, vegetated, natural, or buffer, or the term substantial vegetated natural buffer. So we have turned here to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, which defines the term substantial as considerable in quantity or significantly great. And simply put, 16 feet of vegetation is not substantial in this context, especially when 30 feet is the specified minimum. The second term is vegetated, which relates to the establishment of vegetation. And the third term is natural, which is defined as produced by nature. Throughout the town code, there is a distinction made between natural features and those that are man-made or artificial. And clearly a paved path is neither a natural feature nor is it vegetated. Lastly, A buffer serves as a protective barrier, and Chapter 140-4 of Town Code defines the term buffer strip. That's shown here, stating that such strip, quote, shall include natural or planted vegetation or fencing or both sufficient to provide a visual and noise buffer, and shall not be paved nor used for buildings, parking, unquote, etc. Indeed, the terms buffer strip, buffer, and buffering are used throughout the Town Code with the shared objective of noise abatement and visual impact mitigation. Putting a 14-foot swath of pavement and grass through the middle of a 30-foot substantial vegetated natural buffer is simply not consistent with the meaning of substantially vegetated, natural, or buffer. The zoning also specifies that 30 feet should be the minimum depth of the buffer, and as I'll point out shortly, science-based guidance recommends protecting buffers at least twice as wide as this along highways. So next, I'd like to address how the proposed activity is contrary to the purpose of this buffer in the zoning. The building inspector's determination relies on the zoning definition for buffer strip, but also determines that the buffer in this section of the code is distinct from the code's definition of buffer strip. We agree that this buffer has a distinct purpose by expressly naming the source of impact to be mitigated, namely the throughway. The purpose of this buffer is to reduce impacts from the throughway to adjacent properties and the wider town, including air pollution, noise, and visual impacts. We also note that Chapter 140-22.1H, Gateway Districts, specifically cites consideration of an increased vegetated buffer along the throughway to mitigate the harmful impacts of air pollution on residential dwelling units, should they be sited there. This buffer serves a secondary purpose, however, that is similar to buffer strips, and that is to provide a visual buffer to drivers passing through our town on the throughway or entering New Paltz off of the throughway, creating the intended gateway experience of New Paltz. Replacing nearly half of the specified buffer with uses that defeat its intended purposes is inconsistent with the code. We note that the same 30-foot substantial vegetated natural buffer requirement exists in the Gateway Business District on the east side of the throughway. Significantly reducing the required buffer on one side of the throughway could set a precedent for the other side as well, which would completely undermine the intent behind creating these buffers in the gateway zoning and comprehensive plan amendment. Lastly, there's scientific evidence for why reducing the width of the buffer and paving a portion of it will undermine the mitigation function clearly intended by the code. The width of the vegetated buffer matters to its function, and the ground surface within the buffer is also important in its ability to mitigate highway noise. For example, the USDA's publication Conservation Buffers Design Guidelines for Buffers, Corridors, and Greenways recommends a minimum 65-foot buffer between a busy road and a trail for air particulate pollution reduction, and at least 65 to 100 feet of buffer for noise abatement from busy roads. And so it's currently proposed there would be just 8 feet of vegetation in lieu of the recommended 65 feet. Also, a 2017 article from the Journal of Applied Acoustics called Urban Cities and Road Noise Traffic Reduction Through Vegetation found that, quote, this study reinforced the conclusions from previous work consistently showing that noise attenuation can be attributed to ground effects such as soft and porous ground material. So that's basically saying that natural ground covers enhance noise abatement, while pavement can in fact amplify noise. So in summary, natural buffers along the throughway provide a critical public health benefit. This buffer helps to protect many residents, visitors, and workers west of the throughway, as well as future occupants of the emergency services facility on North Putt Corners Road. Natural buffers also mitigate visual and noise impacts from the thruway, and those should not be, the importance of that should also not be understated. Maintaining or enhancing vegetated buffers along the thruway and preserving mature trees and existing topography are key objectives of this zoning district in the comprehensive plan. The substantial vegetated natural buffer in Chapter 140-22.2 D2F has a distinct purpose to mitigate impacts from the thruway. Replacing nearly 50% of the required pavement or the required buffer with pavement and grass is contrary to the desired functions of mitigating air pollution, noise, and visual impacts from the thruway. And finally, we conclude by stating that paved areas should be prohibited from this type of buffer, just as they are from buffer strips defined in the code. So as I said at the beginning, the ENCB fully supports routing the Empire State Trail through this property, but the trail should be kept out of the required buffer. And I thank you for your consideration of our appeal, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. I will stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you. Amy, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I just have a question. I'm sorry, I'm still new to this. Is it possible to move the trail, the bike trail farther from the thruway and get the 30-foot buffer between the property line and the trail?
Well, this is just a conceptual plan at this stage, and I'm not qualified, I guess, to say where the trail should go, but it seems like there's plenty of room on that site to have include the proposed development and site the trail outside of the 30-foot buffer.
I guess the question is for the board. Does anybody know if the position of the trail is set, or can it be moved 10 or 20 feet?
Amy?
Yes.
What I would like to do at this point in time, since we've heard from the ENCB, is to let Catherine from Zelantis and from Silverberg and Zelantis speak. That may answer some of our questions. And then we will go to the building inspector's attorney also to listen to their version also. And that may answer a lot more of our questions before any items come up.
Thank you.
So Catherine, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Okay.
Kathy Zelantis from Silverberg Zelantis LLC, and we represent BFB New Paltz LLC and Trans Hudson Management Corp. We oppose this unprecedented appeal by the ENCB, and we ask that this board uphold the building inspector's determination that the conceptual plan does not need a design standard waiver from sections 140-22.2 D2F. First, I believe that the ENCB has usurped its authority. The ENCB has no authority to interpret the code. The ENCB is a creature of statute, and it only has the authority vested in it by the Town of New Paltz Code and by the enabling legislation in the general municipal law. And nowhere is the ENCB vested with any authority to interpret the zoning code. That lies in the sole discretion of the building inspector and this board, the zoning board. So it was improper in the first instance for the ENCB to weigh in on code interpretation issues. But aside from that board's lack of authority, the ENCB's appeal should be denied in its entirety and the building inspector's determination upheld. The ENCB asked you tonight for this board to examine documents other than the zoning code. And if this board does what the ENCB requests, it would be violating fundamental principles of zoning interpretation. Courts have repeatedly upheld that because zoning ordinances are a derogation of common law, they must be strictly construed against the municipality that drafted them, and any ambiguity must be resolved in favor of the property owners, in this case, my clients. So the ENCB, and you heard it today, they expressly admit that the zoning code does not define the design standards term, quote, substantial vegetated natural buffer. Instead, they want you to apply the definition of buffer strip that appears in 140-4. But of course, the design standard 140-22.2 DF2F does not use the term buffer strip. It used substantial vegetated natural buffer. So buffer strip, which is defined in the zoning code in 140-4, contains a stated purpose to reduce noise impacts and expressly precludes any paving, accessory building, or parking in such buffer strip. So first, zoning code 140-4 and the design standard waiver here at issue 140-22.2 D2F, they use very different terms. One is buffer strip versus substantial vegetated natural buffer. 140-4 again has that stated purpose to provide a visual and noise buffer. This same language is completely absent from 140-22.2 D2F. And third, there's an express prohibition against paving in a quote buffer strip, and this same prohibition doesn't appear in the design standard waiver. So if the town board wanted the ENCB's interpretation to apply, it could have simply used the same term buffer strip that is already defined in the zoning code. Instead, what they did is they created a new standard, a quote substantial vegetated natural buffer standard. And they created it as a design standard, namely something that can be waived by the planning board and not something that's defined in a zoning code that this board would have to grant a variance from. So they created a new standard that had the ability to be waived by the planning board or a combination of a planning board and town board action. The town board, in drafting that legislation, could have prohibited any impervious surface from being included in a quote substantial vegetated natural buffer. It did not do that. Also telling is that the town board used the word substantial. It didn't say solely, entirely, only a vegetated natural buffer. So the ENCB is asking you to insert words in the zoning code that are simply not there. So just reading the language rationally and without even the interpreting, the zoning code in favor of my clients, it's clear that the concept plan, as the building inspector determined, complies with the quote substantial vegetated natural buffer design standard. We're providing a 30-foot vegetated buffer area that will be enhanced with the trail, the Empire State Trail, and additional plantings around the trail. The proposed trail, as indicating on the plan, is 10 feet wide. It's not 14 or 15 feet wide as some have claimed. I spoke earlier to the project engineer about the trail, and it's always been proposed to be paved because it will be identical to what's constructed out there now. And my clients have gotten direction from the New York State DOT that it's to match what's currently existing on Route 299. And they need to comply with, of course, with whatever the New York State DOT wants. My clients are willing to provide. The proposed buildings and parking areas are set back more than 50 feet from the property line. So I ask that this board uphold the building inspector's rational and reasonable interpretation that's consistent with the zoning code.
Thank you. Stacy? Oh, George, I was just going to ask for you. George, good evening.
So currently I'm on my phone, so I apologize if the video is not optimal.
It's perfect.
But I just want to recast this from the perspective of the building inspector and the September 14th letter. We were asked by letter from the planning board attorney on July 24th to interpret whether the location of the trail defeats, is inconsistent, or contrary to description of the landscape buffer required by section 140.22 that Ingrid recited before. The concern was whether the proposed trail could be located there or whether it was prohibited, as we understood it. And the only prohibition in the code for a landscape buffer is the definition that Ingrid read before. And that requires a buffer be provided at points when there is a residential district adjacent to the boundary of a LI district property, an RV district property, or the planned commercial district property. So looking at that, this is not one of those things. This is something obviously different. It does not contain, as Ms. Salantis pointed out, it does not contain a prohibition in either the language or in any of the meaning that we see in the definition, not the definition, in the substance of the buffer area that is required in the Gateway District. So in terms of the interpretation, I think the building inspector's conclusion is this is not a buffer strip that would require, that would prohibit the proposed paved area. And then the question is to whether or not this is subject to land use approval. At the time that letter was written, the situation was not clear. There was some concern as to whether or not this was going to be designed and operated in accordance with either DOT or town standards, because this is part of the New York State Park as we understand. So that situation may be clarified, but for instance, if the Empire State Trail was being expanded by the state pursuant to an easement over this property and they were in control of it, I do not believe the planning board would have land use approval authority. I think the state might be willing to cooperate with the planning board, but that issue is not really before you tonight. The issue is, what's the meaning of the Gateway District buffer? Is it a prohibition against the paved area that's being proposed? And one thing I do need to clarify with respect to Mrs. Salantis's letter of December 4th is the building inspector is not determined that that specific plan complies with the requirements of the zoning law. What she has determined is the provision of a landscaped area, which includes a paved trail, is not necessarily inconsistent with that provision. So it's not prohibited per se. It's not a closed book one way or the other. It is something that would be reviewed by the planning board. The planning board would determine whether this is the applicant is presenting a substantial vegetated area that meets the requirements of the code. And if not, it can consider a waiver. As Ms. Salantis points out, that's a waiver that's granted by the planning board, not the zoning board. So it's not a variance of the zoning law. So all those things put together, to me, suggest the determination that the zoning inspector, the building inspector made is correct, insofar as it finds that the applicant is not prohibited per se from proceeding with a plan that includes a paved area. It is an obligation to go to the planning board and have the planning board review it pursuant to the standards in the code as a design standard and determine whether or not it meets the requirement. And if not, the planning board would determine whether or not it would allow a waiver of that provision. And one of the, and this is really not a focus of the building inspector's letter, but one of the points that was being made by Ingrid is that there needs to be 65 feet of landscaping, ideally according to some recommendations from the USDA that she shared on the screen. And I know from my involvement with this property previously, when it was before the planning board, there is a substantial amount of landscape area which is on the thruway side. And that effectively provides some of the mitigation benefit that is being sought here. And what's important to recognize as the town is reviewing this is very different from the situation with the landscaped buffer requirements, because in that instance, you have an applicant who owns property seeking to undertake a non-residential project that is likely to have impact on the surrounding residential areas. And the code is requiring that that property's impact on those adjacent areas be mitigated. This situation is exactly the opposite. There is an existing use, the thruway, which is creating some kind of impact on the town, and the property owners that abut the thruway are being required to mitigate that existing impact in order to develop. And my advice to the building inspector is to look carefully at the code, because there are some constitutional issues that may arise there that the town does not necessarily want to be exposed to. So for these are complex issues. I think if you looked at the building inspector's letter, it's 5 pages long. This discussion took place on essentially the last page of the letter. The issues that were discussed on the first 4 pages are not the subject of this appeal. This was, I think, a summary kind of discussion that perhaps should have been expanded a little bit. And given the discussion that's come from the residents that submitted their letter and the NCB, it's probably something where I think the building inspector may wish to put in a supplemental letter that addresses the issues they raise in a little bit more detail than took place with the September 24th letter. So if you would, I think and Stacy can speak to this issue if she wants, but I think it would be beneficial to the board to have a supplemental letter submitted to you for your meeting on the 12th, at least a week in advance, and submitted to the NCB and the applicant.
Yes,
May I
that
just
would be
ask
beneficial.
one point of clarification? I'm sorry. We were before the planning board for 2 design standard waivers. Prior to us appearing before the planning board, the ENCB argued in a letter that we should actually be required to get 3 design standard waivers, and raised the issue about this substantial vegetated natural buffer. Again, I think it's not the ENCB's role to interpret the code and offer code interpretation to either the zoning board or the planning board. But aside from that, that precipitated the letter request from the planning board attorney asking for the building inspector to weigh in on the issue. And my understanding, the building inspector determined that a design standard waiver was not required from the 140-22.2D2F because the concept plan complied with that requirement, since there's no express prohibition against having a paved area in that code provision. So I think there has been, and unless I'm wrong, and you can correct me, but there's been an express determination that a design standard waiver is not required. And based on the building inspector's determination, we are not required to get a design standard waiver from that provision of the code. We are only seeking 2 design standard waivers, not 3.
I would disagree with the conclusion you don't need the 3rd waiver if the planning board determines that there is not a substantial vegetated area. What the building inspector determined is the inclusion of a paved area is not prohibited by the code. That's a limited decision.
But the code doesn't
prohibit.
Our plan doesn't trigger a 3rd design standard waiver.
Your
It
plan,
may.
Your plan is conceptual. Therefore, the enhanced portions of the buffer aren't shown. So the planning board has to determine whether or not the buffer is substantial enough. It doesn't mean that the trail can't go there. They have to determine whether that 30-foot with or without that trail is substantial. They
Right.
still have to do their work on it.
Right, and we are going to, right, that it was conceptual, it doesn't provide all the landscaping that will be going into there. Is that what you're, okay, I understand that, yes. We're going to be providing additional landscaping in that buffer area.
So ENCB's position is that that third design standard waiver would be necessary if this trail is sited through the buffer. And in response to Ms. Atlantis's comments, we're not asking you to apply the buffer strip definition here. We're asking you to apply the design guideline definition of substantial vegetated natural buffer. And we fully acknowledge that that term is not fully defined in the code, and we believe that's something the town board should eventually deal with. But in this current moment, we're asking you to interpret that code based on the terms that are used there and the intent of the code, especially as outlined in the town comprehensive plan amendment. And we do not see why a substantial vegetated natural buffer would be less protective than a buffer strip.
Well, again, I would just argue that the code has to be interpreted based on the code and the language in the code. And if there's any ambiguity, it has to be resolved in my client's favor. And clearly, if the town board wanted to have the same prohibitions that it did in the buffer strip, it could have used that term, but it didn't. So that's the clearest indication of legislative intent.
Could I just address the point that you're not asking for it to be prohibited? Because the last sentence of your letter from, October, on page 3 says, paved areas should be prohibited from this type of buffer, just as they are from buffer strips defined in the code. So if you're not asking for it to be prohibited, you're asking for a determination as to whether or not the substantially vegetated buffer has been provided or not. This is why I like to do a letter, because this is confusing as to what exactly is what the NCP appeal is trying to accomplish. I think you are asking for the planning board, or certainly the import of what you're asking for, is that the planning board look and see whether or not this meets the requirements set forth in the code. But when you ask that the paved area be prohibited, you're going beyond that, and you're asking for something that, again, as Ms. Atlantis is pointing out, has been specifically defined in the code by a different provision, which is defined. And this is something different and for a different purpose. So it just doesn't carry over from one to the other.
Our position is that citing the Empire State Trail, which is 10 feet wide with at least 2 feet of shoulder on either side, that is 14 feet, that's a requirement. That putting that through the middle of the 30-foot substantial vegetated natural buffer would be inconsistent with that design guideline in zoning, and therefore would require a waiver by the planning board, so that if this project is going to move forward to a formal site plan, they should need to obtain a waiver. And our position would be to oppose that waiver for all of the reasons we have outlined. And we do not believe that pavement should be allowed in that buffer. And our recommendation to the town board would be to eventually amend the zoning to prohibit pavement in this substantial vegetated natural buffer,
right,
just as it is from buffer strips.
And if it is amended, then the zoning inspector will apply that. The problem is it's not amended now. It doesn't require it. And the zoning inspector is limited by the words of the statute.
And we think the words are quite clear about the intent of preserving a substantial amount of vegetation in natural condition where possible. And that would be contrary to putting 14 feet of pavement and grass through the middle of it.
And that's for the planning board to decide during their review.
Right. I mean, I think there's ample evidence in the documents I've seen that the ENCB believes that a more substantial buffer would be appropriate. And that issue has been raised with the town board before, and the town board has not adopted it in whole. So that, if the zoning is amended to accomplish what you believe should be accomplished, then the building inspector will act accordingly. But unless and until that's done, I don't see that the building inspector has an obligation to determine that this is prohibited. There is a process set forth in the code to accomplish a review of this, to determine whether it accomplishes or meets the requirements of the code as it's currently articulated. And then the applicant has an opportunity to ask for a waiver from it, which is, again, within the jurisdiction of the planning board, not the building inspector. And this discussion that you've just talked about is certainly something that's appropriate to have before the planning board as it considers either the question of whether the buffer is adequate, and if not, whether a waiver is appropriate. But that's a process that should be followed that way, not through the building inspector.
I mean, the bottom line is that the ENCB is asking for words to be inserted in the code that are simply not there. There is no express prohibition of having the trail sited in the substantial vegetated natural buffer area. Yes, we have to still go before the planning board through the site plan review, and we will route this trail in an effort to preserve mature trees and to enhance the landscaping there, as we've indicated. And the planning board will review whether it's substantially buffered and there's substantial landscaping there. But there is no express prohibition against citing the trail in that area. It's just not there. It's not in the code. And this is a simple code interpretation.
Now, so in this case, in the substantial vegetated natural buffer waiver or design waiver would then you would have to go to the planning board with a full site plan to seek that waiver. But since we're here today with the ZBA to ask for an interpretation of the code regarding the consistency of what is being proposed with what is currently defined in the code for the substantial vegetated natural buffer. And we still feel that that's important because even though there is not an express prohibition of pavement, we feel that the intent is very clear as far as what is substantial vegetated and natural, and this being defined, specified in the comprehensive plan amendment.
Right.
So we do feel like, and we do have standing as a board in the town to bring this appeal to the ZBA and ask for this interpretation.
Well, what you're really asking for when what you're making the argument here today is a policy argument, and that argument is best made to the town board to amend the existing zoning. But under the current zoning, as correctly interpreted by the building inspector, there's no prohibition against putting this trail within 30 feet of the property line. It just doesn't exist there, and you can't insert words in the code that don't exist. You have to apply the code strictly. And while you may have a policy issue with that, this isn't the board to make that argument to. This board interprets the zoning code, and the zoning code is clear on its face. There's no express prohibition. We feel that the plan that we have presented and will continue to present to the planning board will not require any design standard waiver from this provision, and we will fully intend to comply with it. But your argument that we cannot have any paving within that area is just not supported by the code.
The ENCB would like the Zoning Board of Appeals to determine the consistency of putting the Empire State Trail through the middle of the 30-foot substantial vegetated natural buffer. That is what our request is in this appeal.
And that's not the zoning board's purview. The zoning board interprets the code.
we are asking for a code
Make
interpretation.
policy determinations.
Lynn, may I
Yes, you're next, Joe.
chime in at this point? As I see it, and I certainly want to hear from the parties here, Ms. Salantis, George, the building inspector, but I think to keep it on track, the issue before the Zoning Board of Appeals in this particular appeal is a fairly narrow one. The building inspector made and interpreted the zoning law and made a determination effectively that a 10-foot paved trail proposed to be located in the middle of this buffer under that conceptual plan with enhanced vegetation and plantings would not be prohibited by the particular section in the code. And it is not inconsistent with any contrary with nor contrary to the purposes of the buffer. That was the determination that was made. Waivers is something not part of this appeal, nor for the Zoning Board of Appeals to determine. In fact, whether a trail is ever located on the subject property, and if so, where will it be? What will it look like? How will it be designed? Will there be other plantings, etc.? I think are all issues that would be determined by the planning board, not by this board. The issue for this board is whether or not the building inspector's determination is correct. Period. That's really the only matter before the board, unless Kathy or George or the building inspector disagree. But isn't that really the issue before the Zoning Board of Appeals?
Yes.
To determine if the building inspector was correct,
You're correct.
Yes.
right?
It's a yes or a no answer. No, there's not a maybe.
And not easily arrived at. You've heard a lot from both sides. Mr. Lithgow, it sounded as though would like an opportunity for the building inspector to address some of the issues that were raised here tonight, perhaps to amplify the what went into the earlier letter, which, as you say, was only a couple of pages. Did I understand that correctly? Did you want additional time?
Yes. Yes.
something in?
Speaking with the building inspector this afternoon, I think it was our consensus that the board would benefit from having a clear, having a couple of the points clarified that are in that letter. There was one editorial thing that didn't get picked up, as was pointed out in the letter that was read earlier. The syntax was inverted. We just want to clarify it so you can be very clear about what you are doing and know that the building inspector, that is the building inspector's determination. We think the prohibition is not applicable here. We think there's a factual decision that has to be made, and there is nothing inherently in conflict with the buffer area requirement to a paved area, providing when all the necessary vegetation and landscaping is provided to accomplish that buffering purpose. But that's a factual determination that has to be made. All we're saying is it is not impossible to accomplish.
It's not prohibited.
Not prohibited by the terms.
Right. Whether or not it will ever happen is really going to be determined before a different board.
Correct.
And it's up to the Zoning Board of Appeals if you want to allow any of the people who've spoken tonight to submit some additional information to the board. If you do, I think there was a request that it be submitted at least 1 week before your next meeting. Did I hear right?
That was my suggestion. And what I would ask is clarification of the issues that have been raised. That's what we would like to do. We don't necessarily think it would be helpful to expand the discussion. We want to make clear the letter and address specific points that have been raised by either the NCB or the applicant that bear upon the statement in that letter.
If the board wants to give the building inspector the additional, to allow them to put something else additional in, the board can do that. It can continue this hearing to the next month and await that submission.
May I ask a question? Hello?
You're the chairman.
Oh, okay. Route 299, as the Empire State Trail travels across Route 299 heading towards Highland, I was quite amazed it was all blacktop. And I didn't know why, And finally, someone told me it was ADA compliant. Is there any validity to that?
I believe that's what the state requires.
For the access for things like wheelchairs?
ADA compliancy calls for a smooth, hard surface, which could be achieved by something other than pavement. So, to speak to that, you'd really have to ask.
I understand. That's
I don't know if that is
a smooth, hard surface. I understand. It could be blacktop or concrete is impractical. I understand.
The discussion has always been about a hardened surface, to the building inspector's point.
The state specs for the trail, I don't know. They may have their own design standards for blacktopping.
Okay.
I spoke to the project engineer today, and he said he was directed by the state to essentially continue what's already existing. So it's going to look like what's already out there.
If it ever occurs, right?
If it ever occurs.
Yeah.
So will there be more information forthcoming?
It sounds as though the building inspector would like to submit some additional writing to the board to be considered at a continued hearing in January.
I mean,
January 13th.
I think this board has what it needs. I mean, obviously, if the building inspector needs more time, but the issue is there a prohibition against putting the trail in the 30-foot area? And there is not under the code. So contrary to what the ENCB is arguing, there is no prohibition against putting the trail there. Yes, do we still have to comply with the design standards like we do every other design standard in the code before the planning board? Of course, and we intend to, but there is no express prohibition. I think that's the hurdle that we need to get over tonight if possible. But obviously if the building inspector needs more time, I don't think there's any issue about clarifying that point. That point's been made very clear tonight about that's the building inspector's interpretation. We agree with that interpretation and it should be upheld by the board.
And the ENCB's position is that the meaning of the words defining the substantial vegetated natural buffer and that section of the code is quite clear, and as is its intent and purpose, in that citing such a major disturbance through the middle of that buffer area would be inconsistent with the purpose of that, and would necessitate a waiver from the planning board of that design guideline.
My thought, I mean, the parties here are the ENCB is the appellant, the building from the building inspector's determination. I just want to make sure that the record clearly gives, the parties the opportunity to have a full and complete hearing. So if the building inspector is requesting additional time to put in some additional information, I suggest that the board consider that request. We don't really want to foreclose anybody on the hearing of this appeal.
I would just, again, clarify, we're not looking to put in new information, but to clarify the existing information or existing interpretation, and to address some points that have been raised in the course of the discussion tonight, as well as the letters that have been submitted as to the application of the code to the specific facts.
Understood.
If I may speak for members of the board, we've all been given a lot of information. I think a letter from Stacy to further clarify anything that she feels that needs to be clarified might help any of the board members to make a correct decision. Would really not be, would be in everyone's best interest. Members of the board, any questions or comments, please? John, Amy, Catherine, Stephen?
Yes. If I could say, I think I followed this pretty closely. I've read all the documents very closely. The discussion tonight has gotten off a little bit distant from the fairly focused question in front of us, I think. And I'd like to get back to that question. Is the interpretation correct from the building inspector regarding what's being asked here? I think there's a lot of confusion arising from these terms, buffer versus buffer strip. And I think it's been pointed out, in fact, I think this is very deliberate, and the definition of buffer strip as it's in the code did not really apply to what was being tried to do in the zoning amendments setting up this gateway district. It's, you know, as it says for the definition of a buffer strip, it's to protect properties adjacent to the property containing the strip. And that doesn't work for what this is trying to do. They're trying to protect this property from the throughway outside this property. So the distinction is deliberate. It's not a question of being careless or ambiguous. It's just a deliberate distinction. They're two different things. And I see the code as it's written, requiring that there be a substantial natural vegetated buffer at least 30 feet deep. And, you know, I don't think that the determination that a 14-foot clearing with 10 feet of pavement in the middle of that is anywhere near what's being demanded there. So with regard to that, with that fairly focused kind of question in front of us, I think I think the case can be made that the interpretation, it's understandable how it comes up, but I think there's quite a bit of room to say it's not the correct interpretation.
Amy, Catherine? Dave?
I don't have any comments at this time.
Okay. Stacy, anything you'd like to say?
No, not at this time. Like I said, I would like to, be able to submit some clarifications and address some, issues that were brought up tonight, for the board, which, hopefully will make things clearer for them and understand the position that I took and why I took it.
I agree with Stacy that the more clarification we have, the better people will understand the decision that they will be making.
I make a motion that we should wait for more information so everybody understands a little bit more clearly what's going on and too much stuff getting thrown around and getting confused.
All right, I'll second that motion.
Discussion on the motion?
Discussion on the motion.
Okay. You can vote on the motion.
Okay.
You guys want a roll call again, or you just want to do
Any discussion? Amy, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
No, I I would like to wait and see what Stacy wants to add to this.
Okay. So let's entertain the motion that's been put on the floor with a first and a second. All those in favor of waiting to a letter from Stacy signify by aye.
Before the board votes, maybe we could kind of fix
Yes, this will be
the
before the
time
board
for
votes.
that later submission. It's okay.
Okay.
So at least
1 week
prior to the January meeting.
That would be great. It can't come. We have to have a week.
At least.
Yes. Stacy, will you be able to do that? Thank you very much.
I'm sorry.
Okay, let's vote now.
As amended.
As amended.
I vote aye.
Aye.
I vote aye.
Aye.
Nay.
Amy?
Voted aye.
Okay, 4-1. We will wait till the next meeting. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Last item on the agenda. Mr. Rotolo, are you there?
He hung up.
He hung up. Okay.
He must have.
Well, I received on December 9th at 2:26 an email from Mr. Rotolo asking us to only look at 139 and not at 137. His present application includes both 139 and 137. If in fact that is what he wants us to do, I would ask him to resubmit an application with only 139, keeping it separate from 137. I'll entertain that in a form of motion if I would, Joe. Comment on it though first, please.
Well, just a question. I'm not sure. There are a lot of emails that have gone around regarding this application and seeking to amend it, seeking to take things away. And I think that's, the board has to really be careful about that. So the idea about clarifying the application on 139, I think is correct. My question, and I think maybe the applicant may also have the question, if he's going to
Hello?
withdraw the
Hello? Can anybody hear me? Can anybody hear me?
maybe on the line.
Yes.
Hello?
Is that Mr. Rotolo?
Yes, it is Mr. Rotolo.
Good evening.
Good evening.
We have two new members on the board at the present time.
Okay.
Amy Donnelly and Joe Gatto. This is their first meeting, and I would appreciate if you could please explain to them some of the history with regard to what you're looking for.
Okay. So here's the history. In 2015, I was issued a violation for 139, and this application is only for 139. It is not for both. When I was issued a violation by Mark Jaffe, he issued me an appearance ticket. We went to court, and I said to Mark, okay, tell me what the problem is and tell me how to fix it. And he gave me a list of items to do, one of which was to hire an engineering firm, which I did, have the engineering firm evaluate the septic system, and then submit an application for approval to the Ulster County Board of Health. I did all of those things, and the Ulster County Board of Health approved the application. for us to continue using the property 139 Route 208 as it was being used at the time. And at the time, I was housing 7 students in 139 Route 208. After I got my approvals, I went back to Mark and I said, Mark, the Ulster County Board of Health has approved the septic, and he had also asked me to do a bunch of other things like install the dual flush toilets and a low flow shower head and water meters. All of this seemed reasonable because we were going to measure the septic capacity, the leaching field, against what was being used. And we did all this. And then Mark said, okay, now give me a permit application. I eventually, I did give him a permit application. On the permit application, I was completely 100% transparent and said that this was 100% student housing. It is how I bought the property. And it is how I use the property. And as I understood, the matter was then settled. And I had complied. He had given me a building permit. And then later on, much later, he issued a certificate of occupancy consistent with the application that we gave to the Board of Health and the Board of Health approval. After that, he then issued a different violation, but substantially the same as the other one. In this one, though, he addressed an order to remedy that said, single-family house used as student housing, use not allowed. Well, I didn't understand that because I don't even know how to correct that order to remedy, how to comply with the order to remedy. So I was then brought back to New Paltz Town Court, and as a result of that, I filed the application that is before you, asking for a zoning board of appeals to consider everything that was done in order to allow me to operate in a manner that was consistent with what the Ulster County Board of Health approved. Now, that's essentially the history of it, but if I can, I wanted to go over and address a couple of points that, and it might be just my confusion, but I don't understand. It has to do with Mr. Moriello's memo that he says the zoning board doesn't have standing to hear this matter and therefore doesn't have the authority to change anything. I'm confused about that because the attorney, a different town attorney, Kevin Barry, said at a May 28, 2019 hearing, and I gave a copy of the court transcript. I don't know if all the members have it, but if you look at that court transcript, he says at 4 different places in the transcript, he says that at page 4, lines 4 and 5, he says it's a zoning enforcement matter. On page 4, also lines 10 through 13, he says it's a zoning enforcement matter. At page 7, lines 7 and 8, he says it's a zoning enforcement matter. Page 9, lines 20 and 21, he says it's a zoning enforcement matter. And he also sent a letter to the judge dated November 18, 2019, specifically pertaining to this application. And he says it's a zoning enforcement matter. Now, I've also been listening in this evening. It's my first time doing this, so I myself am not very good. But I was listening, and I did hear say, a waiver is granted by the planning board, not the zoning board. I wrote that down because I don't know whether it's a matter of the communications not being delivered to me as to exactly what I got to do in order to fully comply and operate in a manner that is consistent with what the Board of Health approved. And I incurred several thousands of dollars of expenses in order to hire the engineering firm, have them evaluate everything, install the dual flush toilets, install the low flow shower heads, did everything installed the water meters also, even though I'm well water, in order to measure how much water is being used. So I don't know what it is that I need to do, but it's not being communicated to me on exactly what it is that I need to do or it's been communicated to me in such drips and drabs and pieces. As an example, having just received this letter, this memo from Mr. Moriello, and I'm saying to myself, okay, they're saying all over these hearings that this is a zoning enforcement matter. Now it's not a zoning enforcement matter. So I'm confused about that, and I'm asking for clarification on that. I also wanted to point out a few other things, and regarding the use table. Mr. Moriello did say in his letter, he said the online version is misaligned. And I'm saying, okay, but even if the online version is misaligned, Stacy said that there are a few, and I think it's more than just a few. I know of right across the street from me is one actually. But Stacy said there are a few multifamilies in R1 that were built prior to 1976 or converted to multifamily with C of O's. Well, my house was also built prior to 1976, exactly as it appears today, which is it has a downstairs kitchen and an upstairs kitchen and downstairs bathrooms and upstairs bathrooms. And the certificate of occupancy that I was granted by Mark Jaffe specifically cites that. So if the house was built that way prior to 1976, why do some residents enjoy the benefit of pre-existing non-conforming use, but others, like me, whose house was built prior to 1976, do not? So that was another question that I had. I also wanted to refer you folks to, if you got it, a copy of the court transcript for February 9th, 2016, and I think it's at page 2, where Mark Jaffe said in court, he said, well, we've reached an agreement that he's going to do this. And in that agreement, he details not very in-depth, but he does say he's going to go to the Board of Health, he's going to get his approvals, and he said to me off the record, he said, look, if the Board of Health is good with this, then I'm good with this. Again, I did absolutely everything that he had asked for, only to have him come back and issue really the same violation later on and telling me that student housing is a use not allowed in the town of New Paltz when there is a great deal of student housing in the town of New Paltz. So, and if there is an extra step that I need to satisfy, then it should be told to me and be provided with exact instructions on what it is that I got to do. But this information has not been forthcoming in the past. Requiring me also to keep one or more rooms empty. What it does, it creates a return based on assessed value that is substantially below what the statutory rate allows. And I guess Mr. Moriello can speak to that, but based on assessed value, when you're assessed and you have what's called an income producing property, and the income approach is what is the method of determining evaluation. The assessed value is over 300. In theory, based on 8.5%, which is the statutory rate, I'm supposed to realize somewhere in the neighborhood of $24,000 net, and I don't come anywhere near that. In fact, most years I lose money on these properties.
Okay.
Excuse
me, Mr. Rotolo. The financial aspects of this property are really not relevant to
I'll skip over them then.
Okay.
And Leonard, I'm going to bow out because I've done work for him before. I wanted to bow out before you get involved with the whole thing.
You're going to recuse?
Yes.
Okay. Good night.
Good night.
Okay.
Mr. Moriello?
Yes.
Amy, are you there?
Can't you see me? Yes. Mr. Rotolo is applying for a special use permit. And as I understand it, tell me if this is correct. I'm sorry, I'm new here. That's for a use which is permitted in the district, but under certain conditions. Is that right?
I guess Mr. Moriello. A special use permit would be granted for a use that is allowed under the use table if it is an allowed special use.
Right. So, Mr. Rotolo, what is the use that you're asking for that you don't have right now?
It is a very minimal use to be able to operate in a manner that is consistent with the Catskill Associate application that was submitted to the Board of Health and the Board of Health approved. Namely, when you look at that application, at the time I was using a 139 Route 208 to house 7 students. I am being told that I can only house 5 because of a definition of family. And so it's a de minimis. I'm sorry?
I believe that 5 is the allowable number in the town of New Paltz. Anything larger than that is to be considered a multifamily. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
But when we went to the Board of Health, and if that was the case, then Mark Jaffe should have said to me, basically that no matter what you do, it's going to be that. But what we did was, what he said, it was, if the Board of Health is good with it, I'm good with it. So I undertook substantial financial expenses to comply with his with our agreement that we had reached. And so I relied on his agreement. And again, this is in it's in the court transcript of the February 9, 2016, which I've provided. So it puts me. Sure.
I'm a new member. There's one other new
Okay.
member here. It would be very helpful
Okay.
to us if your application included current data, like for instance, something that the Board of Health said to you or an engineer said to you verbally without a written record, is not something that I think the zoning board can consider. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Moriello, but it would be very helpful to us to have a full application. It doesn't sound to me like what you want is a special use permit. So it would be more helpful to have an application which is current, based on the current circumstances, so that a new member can consider it.
The application that is before you now contains the Catskill Associates report. And in that application, I'm sorry?
The one from 4 or 5 years ago?
The one that I did when I was asked to do that. Now, if I'm going to be asked to go back to, and am I supposed to now go back to the Board of Health again? Am I supposed to hire an engineer again? Am I supposed to start from scratch? All along, this has been a continuation of this report. And all of this has to do really with the same issue that was started in 2016 when I complied fully.
Okay, but I wasn't on the board then. So what I'm asking is that you submit an application that contains current information, because information which is 4 or 5 years old involving a building inspector who's no longer part of the town is not an application I feel comfortable reviewing.
I am not aware that Mark Jaffe was no longer part. In fact, I asked that specific question and it was not answered for me. Thank you for clarifying that. But what I would have to do then is to just start over and hire another engineering firm. It's not feasible for me to do that. What I'm asking you folks to do is to consider the application that is before you, which is only for 139 Route 208 and not 139, 137. Some of that discussion was going on that when I was trying to figure out how to buzz in.
Are you asking for a variance or a special use permit?
Mark Jaffe told me that what I needed to apply for was a special use permit. Now, every time I'm told to do something, I do it to the umpteenth letter of the law, only to be met with a different standard and only to be met with a different standard of this is what's been going on for so many years, that I try to comply and it just never gets done. So what Amy, the new member, is asking is to submit an application containing new information, but the application that is now before you is dated. Let me just see what the date on this is. And the date on it, I can't find it right now, but it's a recent application.
Okay.
The date on it is 11/18/2019.
My question is.
Okay, 11/18/2019. Thank you.
My question is, are you asking for an area variance, a use variance, or a special use permit?
Okay, I don't even know the difference between those, and I don't even know if I'm asking for the right thing. I am asking for that which Mark Jaffe told me to ask for, and I have to assume that this is the right thing. If it's not the right thing, then please tell me what is the right thing. Give me the forms. I will fill them out and resubmit. My question would be, do I now have to pay another $500 fee?
When
Anybody,
if I
please?
may,
Yep, if you may, Joe.
I've been part of the history. And to kind of get to Amy's question, a year or better ago, there was an application by Mr. Rotolo submitted for a use variance to be able to use the property not as a single family residence, but as a multiple residence. The application came on and it was withdrawn, I think, even before there was a public hearing. The advice and to ask for a use variance and the determination to make the application for the use variance, I obviously don't know how that came about, but Mr. Rotolo does, and he made the use variance application and then withdrew it. This application is for a special use permit. That's the application before you. Those are the submissions. He's chosen to make that application.
So as I understand, a special use permit is for a use which is permitted in the district, but he has to meet certain conditions that are laid out in the code. Is that right?
Right. The use is not specifically disallowed, but it has to be allowed as a special use. And under our code, even if that use were allowed, the authority to grant special use permits has been delegated to the planning board and not to the zoning board of appeals. Those were the points I made in my letter, and I submitted that letter for the board in advance of tonight and for Mr. Rotolo, so that he would see what my concerns are from a legal perspective about an application for a special use permit. In there, I did lay out the difference, if it helps Mr. Rotolo, between a special use permit and a use variance. And my concern from a legal position is that the code does not permit multi-family residential uses within the R1 residential zone. Now, I know Mr. Rotolo has relied on some screenshot that seems, according to him, to have misaligned the categories, etc. I've been part of emails and the rest of it. I assure him that the copy that I attached to my letter is from the official site, the E-Code Library, which is the company that the town has contracted for to put the zoning code online in accordance with the zoning laws and the other local laws, the entire code, as they were filed with the Secretary of State. There's no misalignment. Single-family detached one-family dwellings are the allowed use within the R1 zone. There is no provision in the following category for multifamily dwelling either by special use permit or with special conditions. And I think that's a hurdle that this application has to overcome as a matter of law before it can succeed. Now, that said, the applicant, I suppose, is free to renew or put in an application for a use variance if he's so inclined.
Was
But
that
I'm concerned for this application as a matter of law.
Okay, let me just make some. All right. So what I wanted to respond to some things, if I may, that Mr. Moriello said. He's correct. I did rely, and I did say, look, the screenshot that I'm looking at is directly aligned. But even greater reliance was put on the email that I received from Stacy Delaire, which says, yes, there are a few multifamily uses, homes that are used as multifamily use in R1, and those are homes that were constructed that way prior to 1976 or altered with a C of O. Now, what I'm saying is, my home was built exactly as it is now prior to 1976. So, and I'm willing to, by the way, put in whatever other application has, whatever gets this done, put it that way, okay? So I'm willing to, and I have been willing to work with the town and comply to the fullest extent. But when Stacy says there are a few, and I know of at least a half a dozen that are not too far from my house, including the one right across the street from me, 136/138. The question becomes, well, two questions: A, how to get it done, and B, why does my neighbor across the street fall on the pre-existing non-conforming use, but I don't?
Well, can I ask you?
Sure.
Are those houses rented with non-related people in them, or are there two families in them?
I don't know the answer to that. However, I'm also very much concerned of the way the New York State human rights law reads, because the New York State human rights law says that it is unlawful for any person to deny rental housing to anyone based on marital status or familial status. So let me present to you this example, which actually happened to me. 4 students and 2 twins come to me. They want to rent a house. Okay, so those are 6 people. 4 of them are unrelated. 2 of them are the twins. Do the twins count as one individual, which means that, because they're related to each other, they count as one, in which case I would have 5, but really in reality, I have 6. Or do the twins count as 2 different individuals, in which case I would exceed the 5-person rule, the 5 unrelated person rule. But then you get into the whole issue of, am I engaging in violation of the New York State human rights law that precludes me from discriminating based on marital status or familial status of such persons. So, those are questions that come before me that I don't have answers to, but what I'm looking to do is to get this done. So, if I can be provided with specific guidance on how to satisfy the town's every concern, which I've been trying to do for years now. And that's why the conspiratorial side of me starts to think other things like what's really going on here. But in any event, I would love and welcome any specific guidance on how to get this done, because I have one town attorney that tells me over half a dozen times in court proceedings that this is a zoning enforcement matter. Now I have another attorney saying, no, it's not. It's quite something else, and you're knocking on the wrong door. And of course, this comes on top of me complying totally and completely with everything that Jaffe asked me in the past. So now, I'm trying to get it done. I'm trying to get it done and not violate any other laws, such as the New York State human rights law. So tell me how to do that, please.
Well, it appears to me, as I've been listening, special use are not allowed in multifamily in the R1 zoning district. That's a problem for you right there. So that obviously is not, the shoe is not fitting there.
Even though there are other multifamily uses in R1.
We're dealing with you, not them. Joe, am I correct?
Yes, I mean, it's this application that you're dealing with, and that's all. The applicant wants to make an argument that others exist. What bearing that has on this application, I really don't think it has any. And certainly I don't think the board has enough information before it without the assistance of the building inspector responding to some of the claims that have been made here tonight about what uses have been permitted, what's been legal, what has not been legal, why there were zoning enforcement issues. There's certainly another side. The one thing the board can do, and although it has my letter, technically I think the board could set this down for a public hearing like it would any other application for a special use permit.
I think that would be a good idea.
Certainly that would, that avoids any argument by anyone, especially the applicant, that they did not have an opportunity to fully discuss it at a public hearing. I'm concerned that at the end of that public hearing, if the applicant is not able to get over the hurdle of what's allowed under the use table, that I'm concerned for the outcome of the application itself, but that should really await a hearing at which he can put in his proof, building inspector can put in their proof, put in any information they want, and then the board will make a determination. As to trying to suggest what avenues to follow, I would refrain from doing that at this point.
You're our attorney, not his attorney.
Yeah, I really can't give him the advice as to what to do that. As I said, he made an application for a use variance. The permission from this board to use a particular piece of property in a manner that is not permitted under the zoning law. And that application was withdrawn. It's his prerogative, but it was withdrawn and not before the board. This is an application for a special use permit. You can deal with this application. But as to counseling him as to what way to go to, quote, get it done, I think the board, and certainly I, am going to refrain from doing that.
Thank you. Amy?
Suggestion for Mr. Rotolo. If you
Yes.
if you submit an application, could you make sure
Amy, hold on. I don't believe it is our place as a zoning board of appeals to advise an applicant.
Okay, then let me address a question to you. If I see that that 4 or 5 years ago, the applicant was told something verbally by somebody who no longer works for the town, am I just
Never. I'm sorry, go ahead.
am I justified in saying I don't have enough information on this and I have to vote no on this application? Because
Can I respond to that?
I think that all of that will come out at a public,
hearing.
Okay.
Yes.
the answers to your questions.
Okay.
What I would like, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'd like to set entertain a motion for a public hearing for Mr. Rotolo for our January 13th meeting with regard to the special use permit that he's asking for 139 Route 208.
I would rather, I don't know, actually, I don't know how to go. What is is a use variance permit an easier permit to get?
I will tell you, Mr. Rotolo, we are not here to counsel you with legal advice. I
am asking for the town's help. I'm not asking for legal advice. I'm asking for the town's help.
Well, the town's attorney is here who works for us.
I understand that. And isn't there something that says, help the applicant understand what it is that he has to do in order to achieve the objective that he's looking to achieve?
I would strongly recommend counsel within the area.
I'm sorry, strongly recommend the counsel within?
I would strongly recommend that you seek counsel in this area to give you advice.
Okay, I have been though working, trying to get this past, the approval stage for years now, and it hasn't been happening.
Well, you have several options. We can move on with a public hearing to be held at the next meeting. Or you can, at some point in time, speak to counsel and change your situation, change your app, or resubmit an application with a different situation.
Resubmit what kind of application?
Whatever application your counsel advises.
Okay, it's not really clarifying anything for me.
Yes, but that is not our role as a zoning board to advise you how to complete an application with regard to the type of use.
And I agree with that. It's not the zoning board's job, but it's also neither the building inspector's job. Is that the case, that it's not Stacy's job or whoever?
I would start with Stacy.
Okay.
And she will advise.
I have been, and I submitted this application that is now before you. I submitted it to
Okay,
Stacy.
so then we will have, then I have put a motion on the floor to hold a public hearing at the January 12th meeting. 13th meeting, excuse me. I'll entertain and look for a second. Is there a second?
A second.
Thank you, John. Okay, all those in favor signify by aye. Catherine, yes.
Aye.
Yes. Public hearing will be held on January 13th. What I would like you to do is to make sure that would like you to contact Alana at 255-0102 extension 3. Or you can email her at planzoneboard@townofnewpaltz.org. Would you like me to repeat that?
I have
He's
that
already been
information.
emailing me.
Okay, thank you.
Is the planning board and the zoning board the same members, or it's different members?
No, definitely different members. They are two different boards of people. No one is on both boards.
Okay. And what's the purpose of the public hearing? How would it be beneficial to me or detrimental to me?
You will be sending information to your surrounding neighbors. You'll put a sign out on your front lawn indicating that there is a public hearing to be held. And your neighbors may come and speak yay or nay towards what you are looking forward to do.
And how do I have to give them copies of
No, you will.
In other words, presumably.
You will send them a notice via the US mail indicating what you intend to do at that particular property, what you are what you are seeking to do. And when they come to when we open the public hearing, you will again explain what you're hoping to achieve, and your neighbors will comment in regard to that respect.
Okay, and how many neighbors do I have to reach out to?
Alana,
Len, can I speak to this really quickly? Okay.
Sure, go ahead.
So how it works is I send you a public hearing notice and I send you a list of neighbors within 200 feet of your property. Those neighbors are found using the Ulster County Parcel Viewer. I also send you a blank affidavit that says that you posted the sign on your property and mailed those notices within 10 days of the public hearing. So you also send me a photo of the sign that's in front of your house. So that's how it works. I am responsible for noticing the paper. So there'll be a notice in the paper that says that the public hearing is happening, and it will also be on the town website. So your responsibility would be to mail those notices and to post the sign on your property, and then to give me a signed and notarized affidavit saying that you did that. Does that make sense?
Okay, it does make sense. Yes, thank you. It's within 200 feet of the property, you said?
Yes. Or it might be 500
Okay.
feet. I think the town does 500 feet.
Okay. All right, will do.
Thank you, Mr. Rotolo. Any of the
Thank you.
members, any members of the board have anything they'd like to discuss? No from John. Catherine, no? I can't see Amy's face.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I was visible.
No, now you've got the whole screen.
Oh,
Anything you'd like to discuss?
nothing further. Thank you.
Okay, Joe?
No, Len, thank you.
Okay, entertain a motion to close the meeting.
So move.
Seconded by Amy. All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Meeting closed. Thank you all very much. Have a good evening.
Thanks.
Good night.
Thank you all.
Good night.
Good night.